Would you kill for love? Not just say it, but actually pick up a loaded gun, walk into your bedroom, and pull the trigger? Marcia Winslow never imagined herself as the kind of woman who could. Not after 11 years of marriage, a shared mortgage, matching toothbrushes by the sink, and holiday cards that showed the world their perfect smiles. But love, once twisted by betrayal, can turn into something unrecognizable. Something volatile. Something final. In a quiet neighborhood in Georgia, on an ordinary Thursday afternoon, Marcia walked into her home a wife. 90 seconds later, she was a killer. A respected high school teacher. A bold young mistress. A marriage with fault lines running deeper than anyone knew. And a single gunshot that ripped through more than just flesh, it tore through trust, identity, and everything Marcia believed she was. You've heard stories of infidelity before. You've seen how heartbreak can turn into fury. But this wasn't a shouting match. This wasn't an impulsive slap or a dramatic exit. This was cold steel, pointed at the chest of the woman who, just moments before, had laughed in Marcia's bed. Now ask yourself this: what would make a woman sit calmly on the floor, surrounded by blood, and repeat one phrase over and over, like a broken prayer? She was in my bed, she was in my bed. This is the story of what happens when a loyal heart is broken too many times. When silence replaces trust. When suspicion gives way to certainty, and certainty becomes a sentence. Stay with us. Because this is not just a tale of betrayal. This is how a woman lost everything she built, in the place she thought was safest. The home that smiled, the marriage that didn't. From the curb, the Winslow home looked like something out of a family-themed magazine ad: white siding, black shutters, two-story colonial style, and a red door that Marcia insisted on painting herself. She said it symbolized warmth, strength, and welcome. But no color could keep out the cold that had begun seeping into that house. Marcia Winslow was the kind of woman who showed up early, stayed late, and remembered birthdays. She worked as a senior case manager at a pediatric clinic downtown, a job she loved, even on the days that broke her. Patients remembered her soft voice, her measured calm, and the way she always had tissues ready without needing to be asked. What most didn't know was that she had built that calm from the ground up, brick by emotional brick, after surviving a rocky childhood in a single-parent household where emotions ran high and money ran low. Nathaniel Winslow, on the other hand, had come from structure. His father was a retired Air Force officer. His mother, a school principal. Discipline, respect, and reputation were cornerstones in the Winslow household, and Nathaniel carried those values into adulthood, at least, publicly. When they met, Marcia was 23 and freshly out of college. Nathaniel was 26, already teaching biology and coaching the JV basketball team at a local high school. He was charming but not flashy. Kind, but not soft. He noticed things: how Marcia liked her coffee, how she rubbed her thumb when nervous, how she paused before speaking when unsure. He made her feel seen. They married within 2 years. The first 5 years were stable. Not perfect, no marriage ever is, but stable. They made each other laugh. They fought over things like bills and laundry, not betrayal and lies. They saved for a home, for future kids, though that part never came. Marcia had 2 miscarriages. Silent ones. One she rarely spoke about, not even to Nathaniel after the second. The pain had built a quiet wall between them. He became distant. She became watchful. By year 8, the walls weren't just silent. They were cold. Nathaniel's routine began to change. It was subtle at first. A later than usual night at school. A phone placed face down instead of screen up. A gym bag that started appearing in the trunk though he never came home sweaty. Marcia asked. Nathaniel answered. Always calmly. Always convincingly. A faculty meeting ran late. My mom called, and I didn't want to miss it. I'm helping a few students prep for college entrance exams. Each explanation fit, until they didn't. She wanted to trust him. Loyalty, to Marcia, was a sacred bond. But trust without evidence becomes a game of self-deception. She started to catalog moments, missed dinners, clipped tones, too much cologne for a casual run to the store. It wasn't jealousy. It was intuition, and it wouldn't shut up. Then came the August bank alert. $413.27. The charge was from a luxury boutique hotel just outside downtown, 20 minutes from home, but in a completely different world. Marcia stared at the alert while Nathaniel was in the shower. Her fingers went numb. She didn't speak when he came out. She didn't question him. She waited. And then she acted. If this story touched you, if it made you think, or if you simply can't shake the emotions it stirred within you, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to stay with us for more stories that dig deep into the heart of the truth. Like, share, and spread the word, because sometimes, the most important stories are the ones we share together. What she did next wasn't reaction. It was methodical. She logged into the cell phone account. Reviewed text logs, call times. Created a timeline. Found a second contact number saved under the name, Terry, with dozens of texts exchanged late at night. The number traced back to Talia Monroe. Talia was everything Marcia had once been, just 10 years younger. She worked at a high-end fitness studio in Midtown. Her Instagram was a mosaic of yoga poses, protein shakes, beach photos, and motivational quotes written in gold cursive over her torso. Marcia studied her pictures the way a widow might study an autopsy report, desperately trying to understand the cause of death. Then came the night she followed Nathaniel. He told her he was staying late to help with student projects. She told him to take his time. At 6:57 p.m., she parked a block away from the address she pulled from the hotel charge record. At 7:12, Nathaniel walked in. Alone. At 7:29, Talia joined him. Marcia didn't scream. She didn't honk her horn or storm the lobby. She watched. Quietly. Her breath shallow, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. She stayed until 9:41 p.m., when both emerged, holding hands, laughing, walking to the car like teenagers who had nothing to lose. That night, she sat in the bathroom until morning. Her phone still had Talia's profile pulled up. She looked into those filtered eyes, those artificially white teeth, that toned waist, and tried to remember the last time Nathaniel had looked at her the way he looked at her. But what crushed her wasn't the betrayal. It was the humiliation. Marcia had always believed that if her marriage failed, it wouldn't be because she didn't fight for it. But now, that belief was disintegrating. What was she fighting for? A man who lied without blinking. A marriage that felt like a job no one wanted anymore. Still, she wasn't prepared for what happened next. August 14th, Thursday. She woke with a migraine, at least, that's what she told her office. She left work early. Parked 2 houses down from her own. Her purse was heavier than usual. She'd started carrying the revolver again, partly out of habit, partly for the uneasy dreams that had crept into her sleep in recent weeks. Her plan wasn't to use it. She just wanted the truth face to face. No more screens. No more assumptions. Just truth. The house was quiet. Too quiet. She stepped inside. The dishwasher hummed. A curtain moved gently with the breeze. It all looked normal, like nothing had been disturbed. Until she heard it. A woman's laugh. Upstairs. It wasn't nervous. It wasn't embarrassed. It was comfortable, like she belonged there. Marcia's heart slammed against her ribs. Her steps up the stairs were slow, like moving through glue. Her hand clutched her purse tighter, but her mind was racing. There was no plan anymore. Only reaction. She reached the bedroom. The door was halfway open. She pushed it fully. Nathaniel didn't even have time to move. The first officer on scene would later testify that the moment he stepped into the Winslow home, he felt something off, a weight in the air. Not fear. Not panic. But stillness. The kind that doesn't come after chaos but from something colder, calculated. It was 6:14 p.m. when a 911 call came in from a neighbor on Old Birch Lane. The woman, a retired nurse named Dolores Mayweather, had stepped onto her porch to water her potted plants when she heard what she described as a single, sharp scream, followed by silence, then a distant crash, like glass hitting tile. She couldn't see anything from her yard, but she knew the Winslows were home. And something didn't sound right. Police arrived 7 minutes later. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the air was still, the smell of lavender air freshener strangely mingling with something metallic. The dishwasher beeped softly, finished. A mug sat on the kitchen counter, half full with what would later test positive for peppermint tea. Upstairs, the master bedroom was a crime scene. Nathaniel Winslow lay face up at the foot of the bed, shirtless, a single gunshot wound to the chest, close range. The entry wound was clean. The exit wound wasn't. Blood pooled beneath him, soaking into the fibers of the beige carpet. His eyes were open. Lifeless. Across from him, near the walk-in closet, was Talia Monroe, clutching her upper arm, where a graze wound had torn through her deltoid. She was sobbing, rocking, speaking in fragmented sentences. And beside the nightstand, sitting in a daze with her back to the wall, was Marcia Winslow. The revolver was on the floor to her right. Her hands were folded in her lap. She didn't blink when the officers entered. Didn't speak. Just stared straight ahead like she hadn't fully returned to her own body yet. Officer Peters ordered backup. EMTs were called. The house was cordoned off. And within 30 minutes, the suburban street was swarming, sirens, crime scene tape, hushed radio chatter. Reporters would arrive not long after. Domestic tragedy in Birch Hill Estates, the local papers would say the next morning. But inside that house, it was more than a tragedy. It was unraveling. Marcia was taken into custody without resistance. She didn't scream. Didn't ask questions. She simply stood when instructed, walked to the cruiser, and sat quietly in the back seat. Talia, meanwhile, was transported to St. John's Medical Center, where her wound was cleaned, stitched, and photographed as evidence. At 10:03 p.m., detectives Audrey Lang and Hector Morales began Marcia's initial interview at the downtown precinct. The footage from that night would later be played during her trial, dissected frame by both the prosecution and the defense. But even raw, the video was chilling. Marcia sat upright. Calm. Her hair, once pinned, had fallen loose. Her blouse had a streak of dried blood along the collar. When Detective Lang asked if she wanted water, she said, "No, thank you." When asked what happened, she said 3 words, "He betrayed me." Lang asked if she shot her husband. Marcia blinked slowly. Yes. Morales leaned in, pen poised. Was it intentional? Marcia didn't answer right away. Her eyes drifted to the table, to the corners of the room. Then she said, "I don't remember pulling the trigger." Lang pressed. "Were you afraid?" Still, Marcia didn't break. "I was angry. But not afraid." "Did he threaten you?" "No, did she?" Lang nodded toward the implied presence of Talia. Marcia's voice was nearly a whisper. She laughed. Forensics would later reconstruct the scene. Nathaniel had been shot once, through the chest, from a distance of approximately 5 feet. The trajectory was slightly downward, consistent with Marcia's height. The bullet lodged into the oak baseboard behind him. Talia's wound came from a second bullet that grazed her arm. Investigators believe it was either a missed shot or a warning, intended, perhaps, not to kill but to mark. The revolver was legally registered to Marcia. No signs of struggle were found on her body. No defensive wounds on Nathaniel. His fingerprints were not on the weapon. But his phone, recovered from the nightstand, told another story. Investigators pulled weeks of messages between him and Talia, some explicit, some mundane, all damning. They had pet names, nicknames, plans, receipts from meals, hotel stays, even a cruise booked for October. Talia was more than a fling. She was a second life Nathaniel had been building. And Marcia had found it all. Detectives found screenshots saved to her own phone, messages between Nathaniel and Talia, calendar reminders titled "Check his location," and a voice memo labeled "Proof." It was a short recording, just 37 seconds. In it, Nathaniel could be heard laughing, then saying, "She still thinks I'm working late. Can you believe that? I don't think she's ever gonna figure it out." Marcia had listened to that message 13 times, according to the timestamp metadata. Talia Monroe was discharged from the hospital the next morning and brought in for questioning. Her face was pale, her voice unsteady, but her recollection was clear. According to her statement, she and Nathaniel had taken the day off to spend time without sneaking. They planned to tell Marcia about the affair that weekend. Nathaniel had said he would file for divorce. Talia claimed she didn't want to break up a marriage, but she had fallen in love. And Nathaniel had promised her everything. "I never thought she'd. I mean, she just walked in." Talia's voice cracked during the taped interview. He didn't even get a chance to say her name. She pointed the gun and, "God, I thought she was going to shoot me first." Lang asked if Marcia said anything. Talia nodded, tears running freely now. She said, "Do you think I'm stupid?" and then she pulled the trigger. But something about Talia's account didn't sit right with Morales. She said he never raised his voice, never moved toward her. Morales asked Lang later. "That seems strange, doesn't it? Guy's standing in his own room, a gun gets pointed at him, and he just stands there." Lang shrugged. Maybe he didn't believe she'd do it. Or maybe, he knew he deserved it. By the following Monday, the case had exploded in the media. What began as a quiet, devastating tragedy in a suburban home became a national headline: "Educator gunned down in love triangle horror." Wife snaps after discovering husband's secret life. A perfect marriage. Until the door opened. Marcia's mugshot, stoic, unsmiling, her eyes rimmed red, was printed in every paper and posted on every news site. Talia Monroe gave an exclusive interview to a local affiliate, during which she described the moment the gun went off, the smell of smoke, the way Marcia looked right through her. But not everyone believed the narrative. In online forums and call-in shows, public opinion began to split. Some called Marcia a monster. Others called her a woman pushed to the edge. "She gave that man 10 years of her life," one caller on a morning radio show said. "And he throws it away for some yoga Barbie? I'm not saying it was right, but I get it. She walked in and shot an unarmed man," another retorted. "That's not justice. That's murder." District Attorney Simon Burke announced charges within 48 hours. Second-degree murder for Nathaniel's death, aggravated assault for the injury to Talia, and use of a deadly weapon during a felony. Bail was denied. Marcia was remanded to county jail, where she remained in protective custody pending trial. Her defense attorney, Julia Reynolds, immediately filed motions citing mental distress, emotional provocation, and diminished capacity. She was a faithful wife, Reynolds said at the arraignment. She snapped, "Yes. But this is not the face of a cold-blooded killer. This is the face of a betrayed woman who was lied to, manipulated, and discarded." The prosecution disagreed. "This was not a crime of passion," Burke said. "This was a decision. She brought the gun. She entered that room. She pulled the trigger, twice. As the trial date neared, one question lingered over the courtroom, the city, and the country: was this justice, or revenge? The day of Marcia Winslow's arrest unfolded beneath a gray, indifferent sky. As she was led down the station steps in handcuffs, the crowd that had gathered behind police tape surged forward: reporters, neighbors, curious strangers. Cameras clicking like mechanical locusts. Marcia didn't speak. She didn't flinch. She simply walked, eyes unfocused, her expression unreadable. It was a surreal moment. This woman, once a picture of suburban grace, now at the center of a legal and emotional firestorm that would consume the nation. The official charges came swiftly. The district attorney's office, led by Simon Burke, moved decisively. Marcia was charged with second-degree murder for the death of her husband, Nathaniel Winslow. An additional count of aggravated assault was added for the non-fatal shot that struck Talia Monroe. There were lesser charges, too: reckless endangerment, unlawful discharge of a firearm. But none held the gravity of that first one. Second-degree murder. It meant the prosecution believed she hadn't plotted the killing far in advance, but had acted with intention, fueled by passion and rage. The question lingering in everyone's mind was the same: did Marcia snap? Or had she known exactly what she was doing? Inside the courtroom, the weight of those questions grew heavier. The prosecution's theory was simple: cold, calculating vengeance. In their version, Marcia Winslow had discovered the affair weeks before the shooting. She had taken her time, gathered evidence, read messages, followed locations, and built a case of her own. But instead of taking it to a lawyer, or even to friends, she had armed herself, walked into that bedroom, and fired. Not out of fear, the prosecutors insisted, but control. District Attorney Burke was relentless in his narrative. He described a woman who had allowed her sense of betrayal to fester into something violent and irreversible. The gun, he said, hadn't been a last resort. It was a choice. But across the courtroom, a different story was taking shape. Marcia's defense attorney, Julia Reynolds, was known for navigating cases where truth and trauma lived in close proximity. Her strategy was delicate but firm. She would not argue Marcia's innocence in the sense of denying the act. Instead, she would expose the layers of emotional erosion that had brought her client to that irreversible moment. This wasn't premeditated murder, Reynolds argued, it was a psychological collapse. The culmination of years of emotional neglect, manipulation, and betrayal. To bolster her claim, Reynolds brought in a forensic psychologist. His testimony painted a chilling picture of a woman slowly coming undone. According to his evaluation, Marcia suffered from betrayal trauma, an intense psychological wound that can mimic the symptoms of PTSD. In moments of profound emotional rupture, the brain, he explained, can fragment. Decision-making blurs. Reality distorts. And what remains is survival instinct, raw and unfiltered. Marcia, the defense claimed, hadn't fired with intent to kill. She had fired from a place of complete disassociation. A moment where time stopped making sense, and her pain took the wheel. The trial stretched into 6 tense weeks, with each day bringing new revelations and heavier silence. Witnesses were called. First, Talia Monroe. She entered the courtroom with her left arm in a sling, her posture rigid. Her testimony was emotional but composed. She described the night of the shooting in detail. The sound of the door creaking open, the glint of steel, the heat of blood. But under cross-examination, her story began to shift. Text messages were presented, intimate, suggestive, dated months earlier than she had claimed the affair began. The illusion of a brief lapse gave way to the image of a long-running betrayal. Former students of Nathaniel were called to the stand. Some spoke of admiration. Others hinted at discomfort, subtle, creeping unease that had followed certain interactions. One young woman recalled being given an unsolicited ride home, despite saying she was okay to walk. Nothing overt. Just enough to raise questions. And then came Marcia's sister, Lillian. Her voice cracked as she spoke about her sister's slow vanishing. Not physically, but emotionally. Over the years, Marcia had grown quieter, more isolated. He never hit her, Lillian said in an earlier interview, but it was like he erased her one small piece at a time. The revolver became its own character in the case. A legally owned weapon kept in a locked drawer, and used for years. Its presence was never disputed. But what it represented was. To the prosecution, it symbolized control and domination. To the defense, it represented the last tool of a woman who had lost everything but the ability to react. Outside the courtroom, the nation watched with rapt attention. The internet lit up with opposing hashtags. Hashtag Justice for Nathaniel trended alongside hashtag I am Marcia. Daytime talk shows dissected each witness. Podcasts released daily breakdowns. Editorials from survivors of betrayal poured in, arguing that emotional abuse is still abuse, even when it leaves no bruise. But just as many voices pushed back, insisting that heartbreak is not a justification for violence. And then, in week 5, came the twist that no one saw coming. Digital forensic analysis of Nathaniel's laptop revealed an unsent email, dated 2 days before the shooting. It was addressed to an unknown recipient. Its contents were brief and chilling. I'm starting to feel cornered. Marcia knows. I think she's watching me. If anything happens to me, don't let her make it look like I deserved it. I just wanted to be happy. The email, never sent, hung in the air like smoke. Was it a genuine cry for help from a man who feared his wife? Or one final act of psychological manipulation, a calculated way to paint himself as the victim, even beyond the grave? No one could prove when it was written, or whether Nathaniel himself had even typed it. But it was enough to cast doubt. Enough to reopen wounds and deepen divides. The closing arguments came like thunderclaps. The prosecution stood tall, their voice steeled with righteous conviction. They reminded the jury that no amount of emotional anguish justified taking a life. That Marcia Winslow had made a choice. One that cost a man his future. The defense, softer but no less firm, asked for compassion. They didn't excuse Marcia's actions, but begged the jury to consider the cost of living with invisible wounds. To understand that sometimes, the damage done behind closed doors is enough to unravel even the most composed soul. And then, it was over. 12 jurors. 1 woman. 1 verdict. The courtroom went silent. The world held its breath. And what came next would not only determine the fate of Marcia Winslow, but echo in every broken heart, every betrayal left unanswered, and every person who's ever asked, what would I do, if it happened to me? The trial of Marcia Winslow had already become a spectacle, its every beat dissected by pundits and podcasters, its characters morphed into archetypes of betrayal, grief, and rage. But as the final act of the courtroom drama unfolded, the tension grew electric. The verdict was near, and no one knew which way the pendulum would swing. It began with a witness who hadn't spoken until now, Chloe Winslow, the couple's 22-year-old daughter. She had been silent throughout the pre-trial proceedings, choosing privacy over public curiosity. But on the 17th day of testimony, the courtroom held its breath as she stepped up to the stand. Her voice trembled as she began. She spoke not as a witness to the crime, she hadn't been there, but as someone who had lived at ground zero of the marriage. She painted a portrait not of chaos, but of quiet decay. A father who was charming in public, emotionally unavailable at home. A mother who had once been vibrant, now reduced to shadows. I don't excuse what my mother did, Chloe said, her hands folded in her lap, but I watched her become invisible. I watched her lose herself piece by piece. The room was silent. No coughing, no scribbling pens. Just the weight of a daughter speaking her truth to a room that wasn't sure what to do with it. The prosecution, clearly rattled, countered with precision. They brought up neighbors who recalled loud arguments late into the night. One described seeing Marcia throw a wine glass at Nathaniel on the porch 6 months before the shooting. Another recounted hearing screaming matches, Marcia's voice rising above the rest. Then came the forensic video analysis of the bedroom. A digital reconstruction of the crime scene showed Nathaniel's body on the left side of the bed, positioned as if he'd been seated when he was shot. Talia had been curled against the headboard, her wound consistent with a side-angle entry. The DA used this to assert that Marcia had taken careful aim, firing with clarity, not chaos. But the defense fought back. They presented a timeline of psychological breakdowns, doctor's visits, diary entries, recorded therapy sessions. A therapist who had seen Marcia 6 times over the last year testified that she was deeply dissociative by the final session. She had spoken in metaphors, describing herself as a ghost trapped in someone else's life. Then came the most damning piece of evidence, an audio file recovered from the home security system. The file was unintentionally captured. The security camera in the foyer, set to motion detection, had picked up muffled voices the night before the shooting. The prosecution played it first. Nathaniel's voice was clear, "I told you to stay out of my phone." Then Marcia, "How long has it been going on?" A pause. Nathaniel again, "You're not entitled to answers. You haven't been my wife for years." And then the sound of something shattering. A glass, maybe. A sob. To the prosecution, it was motive. To the defense, it was proof of the emotional warfare Marcia had endured for years. The courtroom had become a theater. And like any great production, it had its final monologues. In closing, District Attorney Burke delivered a searing condemnation. He told the jury that betrayal does not give someone a license to kill. That hurt feelings, even deep emotional wounds, cannot excuse execution. She could have walked away, he said. She could have filed for divorce, called the police, gone to therapy. But instead, she picked up a gun. Then came Julia Reynolds. Her voice didn't rise. She didn't thunder. Instead, she looked the jury in the eyes and whispered truth. She didn't walk away because she didn't believe she was allowed to. She didn't leave because she had been conditioned to believe she was the problem. That she deserved it. That she was less. And then she said the line that echoed in every news broadcast for weeks, "Sometimes, the most dangerous prisons don't have bars. They have wedding rings." The jury deliberated for 37 hours. On the morning of the 6th day, they returned. The courtroom was packed, every bench filled, reporters elbow to elbow, family members bracing for impact. Marcia sat motionless. Her hands were folded. Her eyes, though bloodshot, were dry. Chloe sat behind her, gripping her mother's scarf like it was the last anchor in a storm. The foreman stood. On the charge of second-degree murder, we find the defendant, Marcia Winslow, guilty. A collective gasp rose and then stilled. On the charge of aggravated assault, we find the defendant, guilty. The sentence came 2 weeks later. Marcia Winslow was sentenced to 22 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 14. The judge called it a tragic case of emotional devastation leading to irreversible choices. Outside the courthouse, reactions rippled like aftershocks. Some cried justice. Others cried injustice. Talia Monroe, still recovering, released a written statement, "I wish this had never happened. I carry scars that aren't just physical. But I also know this isn't a story with villains and heroes. Just broken people." Chloe walked out of the courtroom into a wall of microphones. She gave only one sentence. "I lost both my parents that night." As for Marcia, she was escorted into the prison transport vehicle without a word. No final statement. No media plea. Just a woman whose entire world had collapsed under the weight of love, betrayal, and an irreversible decision made in a single heartbeat. And in the months that followed, the case became a cultural mirror. Was she a murderer? Or a survivor pushed too far? A cold-blooded killer? Or a casualty of emotional war? One thing was clear, the trial was over. But the story, the conversation, was just beginning. If this story touched you, if it made you think, or if you simply can't shake the emotions it stirred within you, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to stay with us for more stories that dig deep into the heart of the truth. Like, share, and spread the word, because sometimes, the most important stories are the ones we share together. Thank you for watching.